The radio in my hand stopped working the moment I needed it most, and that was the first thing that told me this was real. I'd worked security for 19 years. Concerts, airports, 2 presidential motorcades, 1 royal visit, a music festival where the headliner died on stage and 40,000 people had to be moved without panic before they understood what they'd seen. I know the sound of a normal crowd, and I know the sound of a crowd that's about to become something else. The two are nothing alike, and a man who can't tell them apart shouldn't be doing this work. What came through the South Concourse at 9:14 that night was neither. It was a wet, rolling roar, like a wave breaking inside a parking garage. The sound bouncing off concrete and coming back wrong, and underneath it a high screaming that didn't stop to breathe. That's the part that put the cold in me. People don't scream like that over a missed penalty. They don't even scream like that in a fire. They scream like that when their bodies have decided that the thing chasing them is worse than the embarrassment of being loud, worse than running out of air, worse than anything their voice was made for. I keyed my radio to call it in. Dead air. Not static, which is what you get when a channel's congested or you're in a dead spot under too much concrete. Dead. The whole channel had gone flat, a kind of silence that has weight to it. Like someone had walked into the comms room and pulled the rack out of the wall and the cables were still swinging. 80,000 people in the bowl above me, 40,000 more in the fan zone outside Gate C. And I was standing in a service corridor with a radio that had turned into a paperweight in my fist, listening to a sound I had no name for getting closer. And the only light was the flat institutional white of the emergency strips. And the only smell was concrete dust and floor cleaner and, just starting underneath it all, something else. My name is Daniel Okafor. I'm 47. And I want to tell you exactly how that night went, every turn of it, because almost nobody who was inside that stadium came out able to. Before I go any further, I want to thank everyone who keeps coming back to these stories, and welcome you if this is your first time listening. If grounded survival stories like this are your kind of thing, subscribe and leave a comment, and stay with me to the end. It genuinely keeps this channel alive. Now, let me take you back to that corridor, because the screaming was getting louder, and I still hadn't figured out which way it was coming from. I should explain where I was, because the geography is the whole story. Everything that happened that night happened because of where the doors were and which way they opened, and who was allowed to decide. The stadium had been retrofitted for the tournament. New everything. New turnstiles, new camera grid, new fire and security integration, a control system so modern that the engineers spoke about it the way you'd talk about a living thing, with affection and a little fear. They'd bolted a temporary fan zone onto the south side, a fenced plaza the size of their 3 football pitches, with food trucks and a 100-foot screen and beer tents and a stage where a band nobody cared about played before kickoff. Strings of festival lights overhead, the smell of fried onions and spilled lager. The bass from the stage you could feel in the soles of your feet from 200 meters away. My post that night wasn't the fan zone, though. I was inside, working the lower service ring, the concrete artery that loops the whole stadium below the seating bowl. Concession deliveries, medical access, the route the ambulances used, the path the players walked from the tunnel. It's the spine of the building. Everything moves through it. And on a normal night, you stand in it and feel the whole stadium breathing above you, the crowd noise coming down through the structure like surf heard from inside a cave. I'd taken the job because the regular contract security firm I work for had won the venue tender, and I was the most senior face they had. They put me on the service ring because it's the most boring post in the building. And I'd earned boring after 19 years. You stand at a junction, you check credentials, you watch a screen. You radio in the occasional drunk who's wandered into a restricted zone, looking for a shortcut to the toilets. That was the job. You learn, in this work, to want the boring posts, because the interesting ones are the ones where something has already gone wrong. That was supposed to be the job that night. That was supposed to be the whole night. My partner on the ring was a kid named Marcus, 23, ex-Army logistics. Still had the haircut and the way of standing with his weight even on both feet, like he was waiting for an inspection. Good kid. Took everything seriously, which I liked, because most of them at that age don't they treat the badge like a costume. Marcus treated it like a responsibility, which can get a young man hurt, but it's the right instinct to have. He was posted at Junction 4, about 300 meters around the curve from me at Junction 7. We'd been radioing back and forth all evening about nothing the score. The smell of the drains near his post that he was convinced was a dead rat in the wall. Whether the halftime pyrotechnics were going to set off the smoke detectors again the way they had during the test event. Normal chatter. The kind that fills a long shift. The kind you don't realize you'll miss until the channel goes dead in your hand. The first wrong thing wasn't the screaming. The first wrong thing came 20 minutes earlier, and I dismissed it. And I've thought about that every single day since. There's a thing that happens to you in this work, where you build a filing system in your head for strange details. And most of them go into a drawer marked, probably nothing. And most of the time, you're right. That filing system is what makes you good at the job. It's also what gets people killed. Because every so often, the thing you file under, probably nothing, is the only warning you're ever going to get. At 8:54, a man came through my junction wearing a medical responder's vest. Red Cross on the back, the laminated lanyard, the radio clipped at the shoulder, the whole kit, exactly as it should be. He was moving fast, half jogging, heading deeper into the building toward the medical bay near Junction 9. There's nothing strange about a medic moving fast during an event somebody's always fainting in the heat, or going down with chest pains, or splitting their head open on a barrier. What stuck in my head, what went into the wrong drawer, was his hands. He was holding both wrists against his chest, palms turned in toward his body, the way you hold a burn when the air touching it is too much. Cradling them. And his face was the color of wet cement. Not pale the way sick people go pale, with the green tinge and the sweat. Gray. A flat, even gray, like the blood underneath had stopped knowing where it was supposed to go and had just settled. I called out to him, asked if he needed help, if he wanted me to radio anyone. My voice echoed down the empty curve of the corridor. He didn't slow down, didn't turn his head. He said one thing, and he said it flat, without any inflection. The way you'd say something you'd already decided was useless to say, but couldn't stop yourself from saying anyway. He said, "Don't let them open the gates." Then he was gone around the curve, the slap of his shoes fading, and the corridor was empty again. I logged it, mentally the way you do. Filed it. Weird. Watch for follow-up. I built a story around it on the spot, because that's what the filing system does. It doesn't just store the detail. It wraps it in an explanation so you can stop thinking about it. I figured there'd been an incident in the fan zone, a crush at a beer tent, somebody gone down in a surge, and the medics were stressed and saying strange clipped things, because that's what stress does. The "don't open the gates" I took for crowd control instinct. You never, ever want to dump a panicking crowd into a bottleneck, and "don't open the gates" is practically a prayer in this profession. It all made sense. That's the thing I need you to understand. Everything made sense for another 20 minutes. And that's the cruelty of it. The world gives you a window where you could still understand what's happening, where the truth is standing right in front of you, holding its own burned wrists. And the window always closes before you've worked up the nerve to walk through it. At 9:02, the floodlights in the service ring flickered. Just once, a single dip in recovery. A brownout, the kind you get when the grid load spikes, when the kettles all go on at half-time across a whole city. I've seen it 1,000 times in 1,000 buildings, but this time, the emergency lighting kicked in for a half-second alongside the mains, which it absolutely should not do. The emergency circuit is supposed to wait for the mains to fail completely before it wakes up, and in that overlap, I saw the corridor lit twice over. 2 different color temperatures laid on top of each other. 2 sets of shadows thrown from 2 different sources. And for one stupid, disorienting moment, I had the feeling that the building was showing me 2 versions of itself at once. The real one, and another one underneath. The way you sometimes catch a reflection in a dark window and can't tell which side of the glass you're on. Then the lights settled back to normal, and I told myself I was tired. It was the end of a long shift in a long week. I rolled my shoulders, drank some water from the bottle on my stool, and told myself I was tired. I want you to remember that I told myself that. Because I'm going to have to tell you, before this is over, exactly what it cost. At 9:09, Marcus came on the radio. His voice had changed, not panicked. I want to be fair to him. He never panicked, not once that whole night. And he was 23, careful. The voice you use when you don't want to be wrong out loud. When you've seen something you can't explain, and you're feeling your way towards saying it without sounding like a fool. Dan, you getting anything from medical? Negative. Why? What have you got? I had 3 people come through my junction in the last 5 minutes, heading away from the fan zone. Civilians, no passes. Shouldn't have been down here at all. One of them was bleeding from the neck. And it wasn't a cut, Dan. It looked like a bite, like a chunk. And they wouldn't stop when I told them to. I stepped right out in front of them, badge up. And they just kept moving like I wasn't even there. Walked around me like furniture. A bite. I remember the word landing in my chest and just sitting there, refusing to be filed. Probably a crowd surge, I said, and I heard how much I wanted it to be true. Somebody got trampled at the fan zone. There's a panic. They're running scared and not thinking straight. Lock your junction down. Hold position. Don't try to stop anyone physically. I'll try to raise control and get a status. Already tried control. A pause, and in the pause, I heard him swallow. They're not answering, Dan. That was the second wrong thing, and it was a much bigger one than the first, and even I couldn't file it. Control always answers. Control is 4 people in a climate-controlled room full of monitors whose entire job, their only job, the reason they exist, is to answer. They answer drunken disorderly calls and lost child calls and somebody's vomiting on the stairs calls all night long without complaint. If control wasn't answering, then control had a problem of its own. A problem big enough to take 4 trained people off the one task they were never supposed to leave. I tried them myself, holding the radio close to my mouth, speaking clear and slow the way you do when you want to be understood through interference. Control, this is Junction 7. Requesting status on the South Fan Zone. Over. Nothing. I waited a 5 count and tried again. Control, Junction 7. Do you copy? Over. Nothing. Not even the click of a keyed mic, not even breathing. Just that flat channel, that silence with weight. And then, at 9:14, the screaming started, and my radio died completely. The channel collapsing from open silence into the dead, nothing of a system with no power behind it. And I understood, all at once and far too late, that the window had closed, and that I had spent the whole length of it standing at my junction telling myself I was tired. I want to be honest about something, because this story isn't worth telling if I'm not. In 19 years, I'd built a quiet pride in staying calm. It's the thing I'm good at. The thing that gets me the senior posts and the royal visits. While everyone else's heart rate spikes, mine drops. It's not courage. I want to be clear that it's not courage, because courage is a choice, and this isn't. It's a kind of slowness, a deep refusal to believe the worst until the worst is actually standing in front of me, with its hand on my throat. It reads as composure from the outside. From the inside, it's just a man whose alarm system rings a few crucial seconds late. That night, that exact quality that I'd been proud of for 2 decades almost got me killed. And it definitely got other people killed. And I've had to make a hard kind of peace with the fact that the thing I valued most about myself was also a blind spot wide enough to drive a truck through. When the radio died, I did the only thing the building's design allowed me to do. I moved toward Marcus. The service ring only has 2 ways to go from any junction: forward around the curve or back. And one of those directions was toward the screaming and toward the medical bay. So I went the other way, toward Junction 4, toward the kid, because if I was going to be useless to control, I could at least not be alone. And a young man who's just watched 3 bleeding people walk through him like furniture shouldn't be standing a post by himself. The corridor curves continuously, by design, so that you can never see more than 30 or 40 meters ahead before the wall cuts off your view. On a normal night, that curve is comforting. A gentle, endless bend. The architecture of a place built to move enormous numbers of people smoothly. That night, it was the worst thing about the building, because it meant the danger was always exactly 1 curve away. And you never knew which curve. The lights were holding steady now, that flat white that makes everyone look like they're already on a mortuary slab. My boots were loud on the painted concrete, the sound coming back at me off the curved walls. I made them quieter, rolling heel to toe, putting my weight down soft. 19 years teaches your feet things your brain forgets, things you didn't know you knew until the night you need them. I'd gone maybe 100 meters, 2 long, slow curves, when I found the first one. He was lying half in and half out of the doorway of a storeroom, a stadium steward in a yellow high-vis vest. And for 1 merciful second, I thought he'd simply fainted, gone down in the heat the way the medics are always picking people up. I crouched a couple of feet from him, the way you're trained to, assess before you touch. His eyes were open. He was breathing fast and shallow, the breaths coming quick and even like a panting dog, but breathing. And there was a wound on his forearm, the sleeve of his shirt pushed up, a torn semicircle of punctures in the meat of it, already going black at the edges in a way that no fresh wound has any business doing. Fresh wounds are red. They bleed. This one had a sheen to it, a waxy yellow-gray gloss, like the surface of fat that started to cool and set in the pan. The skin around the bite had the same sheen. He looked at me, and his mouth moved, and what came out wasn't words, just air pushed through a shape, a dry working sound. I'm trained in first aid. Every senior security man is. I reached for the wound on instinct, to check it, to apply pressure if it was bleeding underneath, and something old and animal in the back of my skull stood up and screamed at me, wordless, "Do not touch that." And I pulled my hand back fast, the way you pull your hand off a stove you didn't know was hot. I have never in my life been more grateful for an instinct I didn't understand and couldn't explain. Because then he convulsed. Once hard, his whole spine arching up off the floor so that for a second only his heels and the back of his head were touching the concrete, his arms snapping rigid, his jaw clamping shut with a click of teeth I felt in my own. And then he came down, and went still in a way that wasn't unconsciousness, because his eyes were still open and his chest was still moving in those quick, even pants. But the person who had been behind the eyes had stepped out of the room and closed the door. I've seen dead men, more than I'd like. This wasn't that. And that's what made it worse. There was no peace in it, no slackness, no leaving. There was still something home behind those eyes. It just wasn't him anymore. And whatever it was had no interest in me, beyond what my body could provide it. I stood and backed away. I didn't run. Running is noise, running is panic made physical. And I already had the cold sense that noise was the one currency I had the least of and would need the most. I backed around the curve, keeping my eyes on the storeroom doorway until the wall took it from me. And then I turned and kept moving toward Junction 4, soft-footed. And my heart, for the first time in more years than I could count, would not slow down. I could feel it in my throat, in my wrists, that fast, hard knocking. And there was nothing I could do to bring it back down. And I understood that my late alarm had finally rung. If you've ever worked a large modern building, the kind with a real building management system, you'll know the worst thing about an emergency in one isn't the emergency itself. It's the doors. Stadiums, hospitals, airports, they're all designed to fail safe in two completely opposite directions at the same time. And which one wins on any given night depends on a server you will never see, in a room you'll never enter. Running logic written by someone who's never set foot in the building. Fire mode unlocks everything, every door, every barrier, every turnstile so that people can flee a fire without being trapped behind a lock. Security mode locks everything down so that a threat can be contained and channeled and starved. The two modes are enemies. They want opposite things. They cannot both be true at once, and on that night, somewhere in the building's electronic heart, the two of them were at war. And which one was winning changed from corridor to corridor, minute to minute, depending on what the server believed about a fire that did not exist. I learned all of this the hard way over the next 2 hours. But I started learning it at Junction 4, because I got there, and Marcus was gone. His post was empty. The folding chair he'd been sitting on was knocked over, lying on its side. His clipboard was on the floor, pages bent under it. And his radio was on the painted concrete near the wall. The battery cover popped clean off and lying separately. And the battery itself gone. That stopped me. A dropped radio doesn't shed its battery. The cover is sprung, it clips on hard. You have to press a catch and slide it deliberately. I've fumbled it myself 100 times with cold hands. A radio that falls just clatters and lies there whole. This radio had been taken apart. Someone had crouched here and worked the catch and lifted the battery out and left. And the only reason in the world you do that to a radio is to make sure it can't transmit and can't receive and can't be made to work again in a hurry. And the security door that sealed Junction 4 from the stairwell up to the fan zone, level a heavy fire-rated door, solid, the kind that takes 2 hands and a shoulder and a grunt to move, was standing wide open, propped that way with a red fire extinguisher laid on its side against the base. Propped open from this side. From the inside. Someone standing where I was standing had wanted that door to stay open. Someone had wanted whatever was up those stairs to be able to come down them. "Marcus," I said, not loud, pitching it to carry just to the next curve and no further. No answer, just the hum of the lights, and far off, layered and faint, the screaming. I looked up the stairwell. The light up there was wrong orange, pulsing, the strobe of a fire alarm that had triggered with no fire to justify it, throwing the steps into a stutter of bright and dark. And the sound came down the concrete throat of that stairwell toward me. that wet, rolling roar, much closer now. And woven into it, under it, a sound I will be hearing on the day I die. A soft, eager, rhythmic slapping. 100 bare wet hands and bare wet feet on concrete steps. Footsteps without shoes, a great many of them, all of them coming down. None of them in any hurry, all of them absolutely certain. I want to ask you something. And I mean it honestly, because I have turned this exact moment over in my mind 1,000 times, and I still don't have a clean answer. You're standing at that door. Behind you, somewhere, the kid you're responsible for is missing, and his radio's been gutted. Above you, coming down the stairs in the strobing orange light, is something you don't have a word for and don't want one. Do you close the door, knowing you might be sealing Marcus on the wrong side of it, sealing him up there with whatever's making that sound? Or do you leave it open and pray he comes back down through it before the rest of them do? Tell me what you would have done. I'd genuinely like to know, because I'm still not certain I chose right, and I've had a long time to think about it. I kicked the fire extinguisher out from under the door and let it swing. It didn't close. That's the detail that changed everything that came after. The small mechanical fact the whole night pivoted on. The heavy door swung halfway toward its frame and then stopped dead, held there, pinned in the open position by an electromagnetic lock that had engaged with the door standing open, fire mode. The building had decided, somewhere in its server, that this zone was on fire, and in a fire you do not, under any circumstances, let a door swing shut and trap people behind it. So the maglock had grabbed the door in the open position and was holding it there with the patient strength of an electromagnet. And there was no override on my side of it, no key, no button. Just a small green panel on the wall that mocked me with a single glowing word. Unlocked. I put my whole weight against the door, shoulder and hip, boots scrabbling for purchase on the smooth floor. It didn't give a millimeter. 210 pounds of frightened middle-aged man, heaving against an electromagnet rated to hold half a ton. And the magnet didn't even notice I was there. The door won, the way the door was built to win. And the slapping footsteps came down another flight. And I could hear them better now. Could hear the ones at the front of it, the dry working of jaws, the absence of any breath or word. So I did the math, the fast, cold math you do when the math is your own life. The stairwell was the only route from the fan zone level down into the service ring at this junction. If I couldn't close this door, then everything coming down those stairs was about to be in the service ring with me, and the service ring connected to the medical bay, to the players' tunnel, to the lower seating bowl exits, to the loading docks, to everything. Whatever was up there would have the free run of the entire spine of the building in a matter of minutes. And from the spine, it could reach anywhere. I had to make the building think there was no fire. Maglocks in fire mode only release on the central server's command. When the server is satisfied, the fire event is over. Kill the server's fire signal to this one zone and the lock would drop, and the door's own spring closer would do the rest and pull it shut. I knew this. I knew it because of 3 weeks of paperwork and briefings during the venue handover that I'd half resented at the time. Sitting in a conference room with bad coffee while a man in a lanyard walked us through fire and security integration like it was the most important thing in the world. There was a fire panel at every fourth junction. The nearest one to me was at Junction 5. Back the way I'd come, between me and the gray-faced thing I'd left convulsing on the floor. The slapping footsteps were one flight up now. I could see, at the top edge of the stairwell where the orange light pulsed, the first shadow lengthen and shorten as something stepped into the strobe. I ran for Junction 5. I made it maybe 50 meters, around one curve, before I came back to where I'd left the steward. And he wasn't on the floor anymore. He was standing in the middle of the corridor with his back to me, swaying very slightly side to side, the way a man stands when he's listening to music only he can hear, or when he's not quite sure his legs are still his. His high-vis vest was twisted around, so the reflective stripe was at the side instead of the back, and as I slowed, my boots betraying me, with a single soft scuff of rubber on concrete. The only sound I'd made wrong in 200 meters, his head turned. It did not turn the way a living person's head turns. When you or I turn to a sound, the eyes lead. Attention goes first, the eyes flick, and the head follows along behind to where the eyes have already gone. It's smooth. It's anticipatory. It's alive. His head turned first, all at once, a mechanical sweep, scanning, the eyes arriving last and empty. And when they found me, they didn't widen, didn't focus, didn't register fear or recognition or anything a face is supposed to do. They just locked on, the way a camera locks on. And then his whole body reoriented toward me, with a speed that had no preparation in it, no crouch, no shifting of weight, no intake of breath, just instant, total, committed motion. The way a closing door doesn't warn you before it slams. I have been charged at before. Drunks, mostly. And once in 2011, a man with a knife outside an arena who I still think about. There's always a tell. Always. Some tightening of the shoulders or the jaw or the hands. Some half-second your trained eye can read and your body can answer. This had none of it. It was like being charged by a falling tree. The fire panel was on the wall 10 feet behind him, the little red box I needed. I didn't think it through, because there was no time to think it through. And that's the honest truth about almost everything I did that night. The thinking came afterward, in the long, sleepless hours of having survived. My body did the deciding. I dropped low and went to the side, the way you slip a rugby tackle, throwing my hip out of the line of his charge, and he didn't adjust, couldn't adjust, committed completely to the spot where I'd just been. I felt the air of him pass me, cold air, and the smell came with it, copper, raw and wet. And underneath the copper something sweeter, rot that hadn't finished arriving but was on its way. I came up on his far side, slammed into the wall beside the fire panel hard enough to bruise my shoulder, and tore the cover off the box. A glass-fronted unit, the override switches behind it, a row of indicator lights below. Zone 7 was solid red. Fire. There was no fire anywhere in Zone 7. The system was hallucinating a fire, and its hallucination was one open door away from letting the whole building be overrun. Behind me, I heard him reorient. That terrible instant turn, the scrape of his shoes coming back around toward me. The reset was a key switch. Of course it was a key switch. A small chrome cylinder that needed a key I did not have. A key that lived on a board in the control room 400 meters away. In a room where nobody was answering the radio because the people who should have been holding that key were either dead or gone. So I did the only thing left to me. The fire panel's entire purpose is to detect a fire. I couldn't tell it the fire was out that needed the key, but I could stop it listening for one. Beside the panel, bolted to the wall the way it is in every building like this, and the way nobody ever thinks about, was the maintenance isolator, the switch that lets engineers take a zone's detection loop offline so they can work on it, run dust, test sensors, without setting the whole building screaming. A row of toggles, one per zone, each behind a little hinged guard. I flipped up the guard for Zone 7 and threw the toggle to isolate. The red light didn't go out. For a sick second, I thought I'd been wrong about everything. But then, 3 seconds later, somewhere in the building's mind, the logic ran its loop and recalculated zone detection isolated. No confirmed fire signal present. Revert this zone to security default, and far down the corridor, around the curve at Junction 4, I heard the most beautiful sound of my entire life. The heavy iron clunk of an electromagnet letting go, and then the long pneumatic sigh of a fire door easing shut on its own closer, and the final soft boom of it seating home in its frame. And then the steward hit me. He took me from the side, low, and we went down together onto the concrete in a tangle. And his hands were on me instantly, and they were stronger than hands should be, cold and faintly slick, grabbing at my vest, my collar, clawing toward my throat with a horrible blind purpose. His mouth was open, and there was no breath coming out of it. None. Just that wet working of the jaw, teeth, and tongue, reaching for me. I got my left forearm up under his chin and locked it there and pushed. And I have never in my life pushed against anything that pushed back like that. With that steadiness, that complete absence of fatigue or fear or self-preservation. There was no tiring him. My knee was driving into his ribs hard enough that I felt something give in his chest, and he did not care, did not flinch, did not even seem to know. He just kept coming, patient and tireless, and utterly without any feeling I could use against him. And in that moment, pinned under him with his teeth a hand's width from my face, I understood the central fact about these things. The fact it took most people far too long and far too much to learn. They will never stop. They do not tire. Pain means nothing to them, and fear means nothing to them, and there is no part of their mind left to bargain with. The only things that beat them are leverage, distance, and a door between you and them. I had no door. What I had, bolted to the wall above us, was the twin of the fire extinguisher that had propped Junction 4 open. I let go of his vest with my free right hand the most frightening half-second of my life, because it meant trusting one shaking arm to hold back a thing that wanted to eat my face, and reached up and got 2 fingers around the extinguisher's strap and dragged it off its bracket. It came down hard on the concrete beside my head with a clang that I felt in my teeth and in the floor. I got my right hand around its neck, the steel cold and solid, and I swung it into the side of his skull with everything I had left. The sound it made was wrong. Not the sharp crack of bone I'd braced for. A dull, wet, yielding give, as though the side of his head had been waiting to do exactly that. He didn't cry out, they don't, but he sagged just slightly, his grip on me loosening for a fraction of a second. And I took that fraction and rolled us hard so that he was beneath me and I had my weight over the swing. And I hit him again and again. I'm not going to describe the rest of it to you. I'll only tell you that it took far longer than you would ever think, that destroy the brain is a thing people say easily across a table and do with enormous difficulty on a concrete floor, and that when it was finally over, when he was finally, actually still, the thing behind the eyes, finally and completely gone. I sat back against the wall with the extinguisher still in my hand, and I shook so hard that I could not have stood if my life had depended on it. Which, in about 90 seconds, it was going to. Because the door at Junction 4 had closed. And that meant the things crowded in that stairwell, denied their way into the ring at Junction 4, had done the only other thing the building allowed them to do. They had turned around and gone back up, spread along the open fan zone level, and found another way down through the medical bay stairwell near Junction 9, the one with no door I could reach, the one the gray-faced medic had run toward an hour earlier, when he told me, without turning his head, not to let them open the gates. He hadn't been warning me about the crowd at all. He'd been warning me about the medical bay. Whatever had begun all of this had begun there, in the one place in the building designed and staffed to save people. And it had been spreading through the structure's veins for an hour while I stood at my junction telling myself I was tired. I got up. My legs worked barely, the muscles in my thighs jumping. I had a destroyed thing at my feet that I wouldn't look at directly, and an extinguisher slick with what I won't name, and a choice of 2 directions down the curve, both of which now had something coming along them, the medical bay wave from one side and whatever else from the other. So I took the only door that wasn't another stretch of corridor. Between Junction 5 and Junction 6, there's an access stair down to the lowest level of the building, the plant level, where the boilers and the chilled water tanks and the main electrical switchgear live. The basement beneath the basement. Nobody goes down there during an event. There's no reason to. It's locked, normally, kept secure, but I had the master fob for the whole service ring, the boring privilege of a senior post, a black plastic fob on my belt I'd never once had a reason to use in 3 weeks on the job. The fob worked. I held it to the reader, and the light went green, and the lock thunked back. And the plant-level door, a security door, not a fire door, which I understood in a flash of grim clarity, meant it had locked rather than unlocked when the building defaulted to security mode in this zone, swung in. I went through it into darkness and pulled it shut behind me, hard, and heard the lock re-engage with a solid mechanical certainty. And I stood at the top of a steel stair in the near dark, with my back pressed against a door I could only pray would hold, and I listened to the wet slapping footsteps converge on the other side of it from both directions of the curve. They reached the door. I heard them hit it. Not a knock, a hit. Bodies and palms, and the dull, soft thud of meat against steel, dozens of impacts overlapping into a kind of drumming. The door held. The lever handle on the far side rattled and jumped as they pressed against it, jostled it, leaned on it. But it didn't turn. They couldn't work it. And that was the third thing I learned that night. And it might be the most important. The thing that kept me breathing through everything that followed. They had the raw strength of a living person, but none of the mind. They could not turn a handle. They could not work a fob or read a sign or solve a latch. A locked door was, to them, simply a wall, a thing to press against and slap and eventually drift away from. The whole war I was about to fight came down to that single fact, and to the building's broken mind, which decided, zone by zone, whether each door in the place was a wall or a welcome. I went down the stairs in the dark toward the only light, a single emergency bulkhead lamp glowing a dirty green at the bottom, my hand trailing the cold steel rail. And I began to understand that surviving this would not, in the end, be about fighting. It would be about doors, about who controlled the building's mind. And as I went down, for the first time, I let myself look directly at the things I'd been refusing to look at: the missing battery in Marcus's radio, the fire extinguisher propping his door open from the inside, the gray-faced medic, the gates. And a very cold question began to take shape in the dark. Someone had wanted the doors open, someone who knew the system intimately, and they'd started at Junction 4. The plant level was another country entirely. Up in the service ring, you could still half pretend you were in an ordinary building, having a very bad night. Down here, there was no pretending. The ceilings were low and crowded, every inch above my head packed with pipework and cable tray, painted steel and lagging and bundled wiring snaking off into the dark. The air was thick with the constant bass hum of the chilled water pumps, a sound you felt in your sternum more than heard. And the smell was machine oil, and the mineral tang of standing water and hot dust off the boiler casings. The emergency lighting was sparse down here. Green pools of bulkhead light every 15 meters or so. And between them, the dark had texture and temperature. Heat rolling off the boiler plant on the east side. A wall of cold sinking off the chiller plant on the west. And a steady draft moving the whole length of the space, from the intake louvers to the exhaust. So that the building seemed to be slowly and deliberately breathing around me. I found a maintenance workbench within the first minute. A steel bench against the wall under a strip light that actually worked. And the first thing I did was arm myself properly, because the empty extinguisher had no nerve left in it and barely any weight. There was a pipe wrench on the bench, the big kind. 2 feet of forged steel with a heavy adjustable jaw on the end that could crush a man's fist. I took it, and the heft of it in my hand was its own small comfort. There was a roll of cloth electrical tape, and a little magnetic LED inspection lamp. And I taped the lamp to the front of my vest angled down so that it lit my hands and the floor at my feet and not my face the way you rig a light when you need to see and you very much don't want to be seen. When you don't want to be a beacon in a dark place full of things that hunt by movement. There was a yellow box cutter on the bench, and I slid it into my breast pocket without quite knowing why I wanted it. And there, bolted to the wall above the bench, was a wall phone. A hard line. Internal only, but a hard line. And I knew from those 3 resented weeks of briefings that the building's phone system ran on its own dedicated cabling, separate from the radio net, separate from the cellular network, its own little nervous system. If somebody had pulled the radio rack, if the cell network was jammed by 120,000 people all calling home at once, the internal phones might still be alive. I lifted the handset and put it to my ear. Dial tone. The flat, ordinary, miraculous burr of a dial tone. The most boring sound in the world. And it very nearly put me on the floor with relief, my throat closing up around it. There was a laminated directory card screwed to the wall beside the phone. Control was extension 100. I dialed it, the old square buttons clicking under my finger. It rang. It rang 11 times, the tone going out into a room I could picture exactly. A wall of monitors and 4 empty chairs, and nobody picked it up. And eventually the line gave up, and the dial tone came back. And I stood there, holding a working telephone, connected to a room where every person who could have helped me was dead or gone. I worked down the card, Medical Bay, extension 140, straight to a fast, busy tone. The harsh stutter that means the line itself is faulted, off the hook or cut. Loading dock 160, rang out into nothing. Building management 110, rang out. And then, at the very bottom of the card, the one I almost skipped past, the one I nearly didn't bother with. Plant duty engineer, extension 195. An internal extension, somewhere down here on this level, in a room I hadn't found yet. It rang twice. Then a voice, low and tight and controlled and very much alive, said, "Whoever this is, talk fast. And tell me straight, have you been bitten?" His name was Reyes. 40 years on building systems, the last 6 of them on this stadium. And he knew its mechanical and electrical guts better than the architects who had drawn it, because he was the one who'd commissioned them. He'd been in the plant control room, a glassed-in booth on the west side of the plant level, near the main switchgear when the medical bay rang down at 8:40 reporting what they called a violent patient incident. And then rang down again at 8:47 not making any sense at all. A voice talking too fast, and then a sound that wasn't talking, and then nothing. He'd locked himself in. He'd spent the last 40 minutes watching the building's brain come apart on his monitors. The door states cascading across his screen like dominoes. And he was, I slowly realized as he talked, the one person in the entire stadium who could see the whole shape of the thing. No, I told him. Not bitten. I'm clean. Security, senior man, name's Daniel. I just put one down at Junction 5 and I'm on the plant level now by the workbench phone. You put one down. A pause, weighing me. Then you know what they are. Good. Listen to me, Daniel, because you need to understand the building before you do anything stupid in it. His voice had the flat, fast clarity of a man who'd been waiting a long time for someone to talk to. I've been watching the door logs cascade for 40 minutes. Fire mode propagated up out of the medical zone at 9:01, and it spread north and west from there. Every door north of Junction 8 is held open right now, every one. The mag locks won't drop because the panel believes half the building's on fire. There is no fire. It's the detection loop. Either something's shorting the sensors in the medical zone, or somebody's deliberately isolated the confirmation logic so that a single tripped sensor unlocks an entire zone. The whole north and west of the building is wide open. Down here on plant, it's the opposite plant runs on its own separate security domain, walled off from the rest, and it's all locked tight. You're standing in the single safest part of the stadium right now. Whatever you're thinking, my advice is don't leave it. I told him about Junction 4, the propped door, Marcus and the missing battery from his radio, the fire extinguisher. He was quiet for a moment, longer than the others, and when he spoke, his voice had changed, gone careful. Say that again. The radio battery was removed and the door was propped open from the inside. From the inside, yes. Then somebody's been managing the doors. He said it slowly, like he was laying each word down separately to look at it. Daniel, listen. Fire mode didn't propagate by accident. The medical incident tripped one sensor. One. And a single trip shouldn't cascade. There are interlocks built into this system precisely to stop one faulty sensor from unlocking the whole building. I designed the commissioning for those interlocks myself. They were active at the start of the event. I checked them at the kickoff walkthrough, and they were disabled at 8:55, manually, from a terminal with administrator rights. I'm looking at the log entry right now. A breath. There are exactly 4 credentials in this entire building that carry that level of access. The control room terminal, the building management terminal, my terminal, here in this booth, and 1 mobile credential, the commissioning engineer's device issued during the retrofit, that by every regulation should have been decommissioned 6 months ago. 8:55. 1 minute after the gray-faced medic had jogged past my junction, holding his burned wrists against his chest, and told me not to let them open the gates. Reyes, who's holding that mobile credential? I don't know, but whoever it is wanted this building open. And whoever it is still working right now, because 3 minutes ago, somebody overrode the Junction 8 security default and dropped the locks between the medical zone and the lower bowl. I watched them do it. They're walking the open mode south, door by door, deliberately, toward the public exits, toward the fan zone gates. The gates. 40,000 people packed into a fenced plaza on the south side, pressed shoulder to shoulder against a perimeter fence, a band still playing on the stage, and a 100-foot screen, and the smell of fried onions. And someone in the building was methodically peeling back every door between the infection and the medical bay, and the largest single crowd of uninfected people in the country, 1 lock at a time, like a man unbuttoning a coat. I want to stop here for a moment and ask you something. Because this is the point at which the night stopped being a story about monsters for me. If you'd been the one on that phone, hearing that someone with full admin access was deliberately opening the building toward the crowd, would your first thought have been to save your own skin? Or to go find that person and stop them? Be honest with yourself. Mine wasn't noble, I'll tell you the truth. My first thought wasn't the crowd at all. It was Marcus and his gutted radio. And a cold, ugly suspicion I did not want to look at directly. Tell me where your fear would have gone first. I genuinely want to know, because I've never been proud of where mine went. Reyes had a plan, or at least the bones of one. The building's security domain could be reasserted, he said. The whole place forced back to a lockdown default, but not from his booth. His terminal could see everything and change almost nothing, because the plant control booth was deliberately walled off from the life safety systems by design, so that a maintenance man's error could never accidentally kill the fire response and cook a stadium full of people. The command to reassert security had to come from a life safety terminal. Control, building management, or that ghost mobile credential. Control was unmanned. Building management was up on the 3rd level, north side, deep in the wide open zone, surrounded by however many of those things were now loose and drifting through the building. There's a 4th option, Reyes said slowly, and I could hear him talking himself toward it as much as me. The fire command panel at the main entrance, North Concourse Level 1. It's a full life safety terminal top of the food chain. It has the authority to formally declare the fire event over and force every single zone in the building back to security default with one command. One key sequence. Every door that's being held open slams shut at once. It would stop the spread cold everywhere, instantly. Where's the main entrance from where I am right now? That's the problem. A pause. It's at the far north end of the concourse. To get there from the plant level, you have to come back up into the ring, cross the whole open zone, and walk through the medical corridor itself. Through the worst of it. Through all of them. Another pause, longer. And there's a second problem, and you need to understand it completely before you decide anything. Because once you commit, you won't get to change your mind. If you force the building back to security default, you don't only shut the doors between the infected and the crowd. You shut every door, including the public egress doors that the crowd up in the bowl is using to escape right now. At this moment, up in the seating bowl, thousands of people are streaming out through exit doors that are unlocked because of fire mode. The instant you turn that key, those open doors become locked walls. Everyone still inside the building, on the wrong side of an exit, is sealed in with whatever's in there with them. I leaned my forehead against the cold concrete wall beside the phone and did the worst arithmetic of my life. Right there in the green light with the pumps droning. Leave fire mode running. The building stays open. The crowd in the bowl keeps draining out to safety. But the infection keeps spreading through every open door. Reaches the fan zone, and 40,000 people fenced into a plaza, with the internal gate being opened from the inside, become 40,000 victims in a box. Force security mode, the spread stops dead. The fan zone is saved. But everyone's still inside the bowl. The slow, the elderly, the children, the people who've fallen and can't get up. The ones who went the wrong way in their panic get sealed in with the dead. There was no clean answer. There has never been a clean answer to any question worth asking. There was only a body count on each side of the scale, and the job of deciding which one I could live with carrying for the rest of my life. Reyes couldn't make that choice for me, and to his great credit, he didn't pretend he could. "I'll guide you," he said. "I can see every door state on my screen, live. I can walk you through the open zone door by door, tell you what's behind each one before you ever open it. But I can't leave this booth the second I lose this terminal. You lose your eyes, and you'll be blind in there. And Daniel, there's one more thing you have to carry the whole way. The person with that mobile credential is fighting me for control of these doors in real time. Every lock I hold, they try to drop. Every door I close, they try to open. It's been going on for half an hour. If they realize you're moving for the fire command panel, and they will, the moment you get close enough to matter, they will do everything in their power to put a wall between you and it. They want the building open. You want it shut. You're going to be walking through a building that two men are fighting over. And one of those two men wants exactly the thing that's killing everyone. I asked him the one question that decided everything. Can the mobile credential override the fire command panel? If I get there, if I turn the key and force security default, can they just reverse it from wherever they are? No. He said it flatly, with certainty, and I held on to that certainty. The fire command panel sits at the top of the hierarchy. It's life safety law, hard-coded. Once a qualified terminal declares the event over and forces default, it locks out every lower credential until somebody manually resets it at the panel itself, physically, by hand. If you reach that panel and you turn that key, it is done. They cannot undo it without standing exactly where you'll be standing. He let that settle, then added the part I'd remember. Which means that if you get close, expect them to stop being subtle with you. So that was the mission, laid out in the green light of a plant room. Not survival. Survival would have been staying right where I was, on the plant level, behind a locked door with a pipe wrench and a working phone, waiting it out while the building and the crowd sorted themselves out somewhere above me. I want to be completely clear that I considered it. I'm not a hero, whatever the men in suits decided to write down afterward. I'm a tired man who'd asked for a boring post. The plant level was safe. Reyes was safe in his booth. We could have simply waited. But I kept seeing 40,000 people in a fenced plaza, the food trucks and the festival lights and the band that was somehow still playing, and the internal gate being opened from the inside, one door at a time, toward all of them. And I kept thinking about Marcus Hasnut somewhere up there in the open zone and his gutted radio, and the kind of person who would crouch down at a boy's post and quietly take his radio apart, so that when the dead came, he couldn't call for help and couldn't be believed. I told Reyes I was coming up. He told me the route back up the plant stair, into the ring, then his hidden path through the building's service seams toward the north end. And he told me the first thing I had to find: a firefighter's intercom handset, the rugged kind that plugs into ports spaced along the route, so that once I left the wall phone behind, we could stay in contact. There was one in the plant control corridor near his booth. Step one was simply getting to him. I went west along the plant level, the inspection lamp throwing my hands in a small pool of light in front of me, the pipe wrench heavy and honest in my grip. The pumps droned. The draft moved across the back of my neck, cold from the chiller side. And I came around a tall bank of switchgear cabinets, gray steel doors with their warning labels, and found that the plant level was not as empty as Reyes had believed. There was one of them down here. It was on the far side of the chiller plant, standing in a green pool of bulkhead light maybe 40 feet away. And it was a man in a contractor's blue coverall. And it was on its knees in front of a closed door, doing the thing they do, pressing itself flat against the steel. Both palms spread on the door, head tilted to the side, patient and tireless and quietly, endlessly insistent. It had come down here in those first chaotic minutes, Reyes told me later, before the plant domain sealed itself. It hadn't heard me. The pumps were covering my footsteps, and the draft was carrying my scent away from it, west to east, toward the exhaust. The door it was kneeling against had a sign on it, white letters on blue. Plant control, authorized personnel only. Reyes's booth. It had been trying to get to him this whole time, scratching and pressing at his one door. And Reyes hadn't known, because that side of the booth had no window, just blank wall. And the door, and the thing was kneeling in his blind spot, around the corner from the glass that looked out over the switchgear hall. I had a choice, and I made it fast. I could go around it, quiet, slip past along the far wall to the intercom port, link up with Reyes, and simply pretend I hadn't seen the thing pressed against his only way out. Or I could deal with it now, on my own terms, while its back was to me, while it didn't know I existed, and the ground was mine to choose. I thought about Marcus's missing battery, and the door propped open from the inside, and I decided I was done leaving things behind me to find their own way forward. I crossed the floor with my feet remembering everything 19 years had taught them. Heel to toe, soft, the wrench rising as I came. And at the very last second its head turned that camera lock, that mechanical sweep, the empty eyes arriving last and finding me. And it began the instant turn, the no wind-up commitment. But this time, I had the wind-up. This time, I'd chosen the ground and the moment, and the wrench was already coming down. I won't dress it up for you. It was brutal and close, and it took 3 blows. And at the end of it, I was on one knee beside it on the cold concrete, with my chest heaving and my arms burning. And Reyes's voice was coming small and frantic from the intercom port on the wall I'd finally reached. "Daniel, talk to me. What's happening? I heard something out there." And I picked up the handset and told him, as level as I could manage, that there'd been one outside his door the whole time he'd been talking to me, kneeling against it, and that there wasn't any more. He went completely silent. And then he said, in a different voice altogether, the low, unsteady voice of a man who has just understood exactly how thin the wall between himself and the end had been the whole time he was making plans. "Thank you. I didn't thank you. Now let's get you to that panel before the rest of them work out where you're going." I came up into the service ring through the plant stair, and the building had changed in the time I'd been below it. The lights were failing now. Not all at once in patches, whole zones browning down to a dim orange as the electrical load did things the system was never designed to survive. Dozens of fire doors held open against their will and drawing current from their maglocks, alarms strobing, pumps and fans all running against a grid that was beginning to sag under it. The corridor that had been flat institutional white when I'd started was now a stutter of dark and amber, the curve ahead disappearing into a gloom broken only by the pulse of the strobes. And the air had a smell to it now that hadn't been there before, the copper and sweet of the dead, no longer just a single body, but multiplied, hanging heavy and unmoving in the still air of the ring, as though the building itself had a wound that was beginning to turn. Reyes was in my ear the whole way, the firefighter intercom handset clipped to the front of my vest, a coil of armored cable letting me plug into the ports as I moved from zone to zone. He was my eyes around every blind curve, and the curve never let me see far. Junction 6, the door ahead is security locked. It'll hold. Your fob opens it. Go through and pull it behind you. Junction 7, stop. Stop where you are. There are 3 door states changing ahead of you. Somebody's working the locks in that section. Wait. Okay. They've moved on. The section's quiet. Go now. Fast, before they come back to it. It was the strangest fight I've ever been in, because most of it was waiting. Standing pressed into a doorway in the half-dark while Reyes watched 2 human wills wrestle over the locks somewhere ahead of me, telling me the precise moment when the open zone offered a closed path through itself, like a man reading a tide, and telling me when the water pulled back far enough to cross. And every time the unseen player dropped a lock to swing a door open toward the crowd, Reyes would catch it on his screen and try to resecure it. And sometimes he won, and sometimes he lost. And the building groaned and clunked around me with the sound of heavy doors changing their minds in the dark. "He's good," Reyes said once, quietly, with something that was almost professional respect. And it turned my stomach to hear it. "Whoever's on that mobile credential, he's not random. He's not panicking. He's opening a specific path. Watch this." And he read me the sequence of doors, dropping, north to south, one after another, a clean threaded corridor of unlocked doors running all the way from the medical zone down toward the fan zone gates. He's building a road. He's not flinging doors open everywhere. He's leaving most of them shut. He's clearing one path and sealing all the others, so the only direction anything can flow is the one he's chosen. A road to where? A pause while he traced it across his monitors. Gate C, the fan zone service gate. He's opening a clean run, straight from the infection to the single biggest crowd in the building. And he's keeping every branching door shut so nothing can disperse off the path. He's hurting them, Daniel. This isn't a leak. This is a channel. Somebody's herding the dead toward 40,000 people on purpose, with the building's own logic. I want to tell you that I was shocked. I wasn't, not entirely. And that's the piece of it I've had to sit with longest. From the moment I'd seen that battery missing from Marcus's radio, some cold part of me had already known the worst version of the night was the true one. A natural outbreak is a horror you can at least understand, a thing without intent, a sickness, an accident of biology. A natural outbreak that a person is deliberately steering is a different and far worse kind of thing, because it means there's a mind in the building, making it worse on purpose. And a mind can be reasoned with or stopped, and here was the thought I kept flinching away from. A mind might belong to someone you'd shaken hands with. We were at Junction 8 when I found Marcus. He was alive. That was the first shock, and it nearly took my legs out from under me. He was sitting on the floor in a maintenance alcove, off the main corridor, knees drawn up, his back against the wall. And when the lamp on my chest swung across him, he flinched hard and threw up a hand against the light and said my name, fast and cracked. Dan, it's me, don't. And the relief of it went through me so hard that I had to put a hand on the wall. His left forearm was wrapped tight in a torn strip of his own shirt. There was blood through the fabric, dark in the orange light. I stopped 6 feet away from him. I didn't mean to. My body did it on its own. That same animal instinct that had snatched my hand back from the steward's wound an hour and a lifetime ago. Marcus saw me stop and saw exactly where my eyes had gone. And his face did something terrible, something that has stayed with me ever since. Because he understood, instantly and completely, why I'd stopped. And he didn't argue with it. He didn't get angry or beg. He just nodded, a small, awful nod, accepting it. "It's a cut," he said, keeping his voice level, keeping it slow, the careful voice. "Glass. When they came through my junction, the first one knocked me into the door, and the wired glass in the vision panel broke, and I went down through it and caught my arm on the edge coming up. It's a cut, Dan. It's not a bite. I'd tell you. You know I'd tell you. I swear to God it's glass." I wanted to believe him so badly that the wanting itself frightened me, because I had learned by then the hardest way there is. That wanting to believe a thing is precisely the mechanism by which you stop being careful and being careful was the only reason I was still breathing. So I asked him, keeping my distance, keeping the wrench loose in my hand, what had happened at Junction 4, why he'd left his post, why his door had been propped open from the inside. And here is where the night turned again, because Marcus told me he hadn't propped that door. He'd run from his post when the first wave came through. He admitted it straight out, ashamed. 23 years old, and burning with a shame that broke my heart, because his army training had told him to hold a position, and his body had told him to live, and the two had torn him in half. But the door, he said, had already been open when he ran. He'd assumed it had been me, that I'd come through it and left it. The fire extinguisher propping it, the battery gone from his radio. He knew nothing about either one. Somebody was at my junction before the wave even started, he said. And now his voice had an edge of something other than shame. I went down the corridor to the toilet. 2 minutes, no more. I always do it at the lull before halftime. And when I came back, my radio was on the floor with the battery gone, and the stairwell door that should have been security locked was standing unlocked. I thought it was a fault. I thought maybe the system glitched in the brownout. So I radioed you about the people coming through, and then it all started, and I never got the chance to make sense of any of it. Someone had come to Junction 4 while Marcus was 30 seconds down the corridor. Disabled his radio so he couldn't call out what he saw or call for help. Unlocked the stairwell door, and then vanished back into the building before the wave arrived. Someone who'd known that Junction 4 was the quietest post, manned by the youngest man on the team. The one least likely to be believed if he started shouting about gray faces and bites. The easiest junction in the whole building to compromise quietly. Reyes had been listening through the intercom the entire time. Daniel, he said, very quietly. The mobile credential's very first action before the cascade, before any of the rest of it. I've got the timestamp here in front of me. 8:51. It was used to unlock a single door from the inside, and then to disable the radio repeater for the entire south service ring. The door it unlocked. He read me the location. Junction 4 stairwell. That's where this started, not the medical bay. The medical bay is where the infection started, by accident with one violent patient. But the deliberate spread, started at Junction 4 at 8:51. With somebody who walked up to that door carrying the commissioning engineer's old credential, unlocked it, killed the radios so nobody could coordinate, and walked calmly away. The infection had begun in the medical bay by accident, but someone had been waiting for it. Someone had kept a plan ready, loaded and waiting, for the exact night an outbreak happened, and the night it finally did. They'd executed it without hesitation. Unlock Junction 4, kill the comms, let the wave into the spine of the building, then walk the open mode south, door by patient door, herding the dead toward the largest crowd in the country. Who has the commissioning credential, Reyes? I kept my voice flat. You said it should have been decommissioned 6 months ago. Who was the commissioning engineer? The silence on the line ran long enough that I had the answer before he gave it to me, and felt it go through me like cold water down the back of the neck. It was me, Reyes said. I was the commissioning engineer for the whole retrofit. That credential was issued to my mobile device during commissioning. 2 years ago, I requested its decommission in November. I have the email. I can show you the email. I assumed it was done. If somebody's using it now, they're using my old credential, which means either they cloned my device, or they got into my account, or... He stopped, and when he started again, his voice was very controlled. The voice of a man stating something he needs to be believed about. Or it was never actually decommissioned. and somebody pulled it straight out of the contractor's provisioning system, where it's been sitting live and forgotten for half a year, Daniel. I swear to you, on whatever you want me to swear on. It is not me. I am locked in a booth fighting this person door by door, second by second. If I wanted this building open, I would simply open it. I am the one trying to shut it. And he was right. That was the whole of it. The thing that let me trust him when trust was the most expensive thing I owned. If Reyes were the one hurting the dead, he'd had 50 chances in the last half hour to walk me straight into them, to send me through a door he knew was full. Instead, he'd routed me around every single one. The man fighting for the locks and the man in my ear were on opposite sides of a war. I believed him. But what he'd just told me narrowed the world down hard. The person doing this had intimate knowledge of the building's commissioning, access to a forgotten contractor credential, and a plan that had been sitting ready and waiting. This was not a maniac improvising in the chaos. This was someone who had known the building's deepest secrets and had decided, long before tonight, exactly how he would use them when his moment finally came. I made a decision about Marcus. I told him to get up and walk in front of me, 6 feet ahead, in the pool of my chest light, where I could see him the whole time. And I told him plainly, if his arm was a cut, then he had nothing in the world to fear from me. And we'd find out together at the far end of this. And if I was wrong, I told him this too. Because he'd earned the truth. Then I was sorry. More sorry than I had words for. He understood. He didn't cry, though I could see how close it sat. He just got to his feet, steadied himself against the wall, and walked out ahead of me into the strobing corridor. The kid and the old man and Reyes's voice between us, moving north through a building 2 men were fighting over. The closer we got to the medical zone, the worse it became, and the worse it looked, and the worse it smelled. The open zone was open for a reason now, and the reason was everywhere. We saw them not pressed against doors anymore, not kneeling and patient, but loose in the corridors, moving with that tireless drift towards some pull I couldn't feel, and they couldn't resist, north to south, following the road the unseen player had built for them. They moved in 1s and 2s and small loose clusters, and they took no notice of each other. And the orange strobe caught their gray faces and threw them into a flicker of light and dark that made them look like something projected onto the walls, rather than walking between them. Reyes routed us through service corridors and plant chases and electrical risers, the building's hidden seams, the back-of-house spaces the dead didn't know to walk because nobody had ever taught them, and they could no longer learn. Twice we had to stop dead and wait in the black, Marcus's breathing too quick and too loud in front of me, while a group of them drifted past the mouth of an alcove close enough that I could have reached out and touched the nearest one's sleeve. And not one of them turned its head, because we were silent, and we were still, and we were downwind in a draft Reyes had told me to put at my back. That was the 4th thing I learned, and the one that carried us through the worst of it. They navigate on sound and on movement, and in still air they barely smell you at all. And a man who can hold himself perfectly motionless in the dark is, to them, simply not there, not hidden, not, there is nothing for them to find. You become a part of the wall. We reached the medical corridor, the place where all of it had started, and Reyes went quiet in my ear for a long moment. And then he came back in a careful, leveled voice, the voice of a man choosing his words because they matter. I need you to be ready for this, both of you. The medical zone is where the density is highest in the whole building. It's the source everything came out of there. The fire command panel is past it, at the north entrance, and there's no road around. I've checked every chase, every riser, every service door. north of here, everything's in the open zone, and everything's full. You have to go through the medical corridor itself, end to end, about 120 meters. A breath. I can help. I can darken it for you. I can drop the lighting on that entire zone. The load's failing there anyway. The circuit's right on the edge. I can push it over and kill the lights. In the dark, they slow right down. They lose the thread. They drift. It's your best chance. But understand what it costs you, because it cuts both ways. In the dark, you're slow too. And I'm blind. My camera's on that zone. Went down in the first 10 minutes of all this. I can't see 1 inch inside that corridor. The moment you step into it, you're on your own. It's you and Marcus and the dark, and however many of them are in there with you. And I can't help you with any of it until you come out the far end. I asked him how many he thought were in there. A long pause. Based on the byte source math and the door logs and how long it's been propagating? He didn't want to say it. Dozens, maybe more than dozens. We stood at the door to the medical corridor, Marcus and I. And I'm going to tell you the truth about what was in my head. Because the truth is, the only thing this whole story is worth telling for. I wasn't thinking about the 40,000 anymore. That number was too large to hold in a body. It had stopped meaning anything. I was thinking about Marcus's arm, and about whether the dark in there would hide him from me the same way it would hide us from them. I was thinking about how I would know, in absolute blackness, whether the kid breathing 6 feet in front of me had quietly become one of them, and about what I would do with the pipe wrench in my hand if he had, and whether I'd be able to do it, and whether I'd be able to live afterward if I did. And I was thinking that I had become, in the space of 2 hours, a man who weighed those things as a matter of course, and that the man who'd asked for a boring post and a quiet shift was gone and was not coming back, and that I was going to have to be whatever was left. Reyes, I said, when I'm through the corridor and I reach the panel, talk me through it. Exactly. Which key, which order, the whole sequence before I go in, so I have it in my head, because I'm going to have about 4 seconds and 1 good hand when I get there. I'll be with you, he said. The second you come out the far end and I can see you again, I'll talk you through every step. But Daniel, listen to me one more time before you go dark. When you turn that key and force default, every door in this building locks at once, including the medical corridor behind you, including any door you haven't already passed through. You understand what that means. You can't go back the way you came. Whatever's in the bowl, whoever's still alive up there fighting to get out at the instant you turn that key, you've chosen the 40,000 outside over every person still inside. That's the trade. That's the whole of it. I need you to have made your peace with it standing here, in the light, before you walk into that dark. Because once you reach that panel, there will be no time to think and no time to weigh it. There's only the key. I had made my peace with it. I'd made it down on the plant level with a phone in my hand and a body count on each side of the scale. The crowd in the fan zone was a known, contained, reachable, savable 40,000. The bowl was already a slaughter I couldn't reach and couldn't change. You save the ones you can reach. It's a cold arithmetic, and I hate that I'm good at it, that it comes to me as easily as breathing. And I would do it again tonight if you put me back in that corridor. And the would do it again is exactly the part that doesn't help, that has never once helped, and the part of a man that has to go on living in the same skin as the choice. Drop the lights, I said. We're going through. The medical corridor went black, and Reyes's voice said, going dark in 3, 2. And on the count, I clicked off the lamp on my chest. and the world collapsed down to sound and air and the heavy copper and sweet smell of it. And I put my hand on Marcus's shoulder and felt him flinch and then go still under it, steadying. And I leaned in close to where I knew his ear was and breathed the words as quiet as a man can make a word. Slow, quiet. Follow my hand. If I squeeze, you freeze, you stop dead, you don't even breathe. Ready. And we stepped together into the dark. I'm not going to be able to make you feel what that corridor was. There is no honest way to put it into words that move at the speed of a voice. But I'll try, because you've come this far with me. It was 120 meters of total darkness, and it was full. We knew it was full because we could hear it, the soft, wet shift of bodies moving against each other and against the walls. The occasional slap of a bare foot finding the tile. The slow working of jaws on nothing. Near and far, left and right, ahead and behind. A whole sea of them adrift in the black with us suspended somewhere in the middle of it. We moved at the speed of cold honey. 1 foot forward, set it down soft, find the floor, take the weight. Wait. The other foot. Wait. My right hand flat on Marcus's shoulder, his left hand reaching out to trail the wall and guide us, the two of us threading a single thin, invisible line between things that would tear us apart the instant we made one wrong sound. Halfway through, Marcus froze under my hand before I'd told him to. And I froze with him. And we stood there in the dark, not breathing, while one of them drifted directly across the line of our path so close that I felt the cold of it on my face. The temperature drop of a body that had stopped making its own heat, a little pocket of grave cold moving through the warm dark. It paused, right in front of us. I heard its head turn that dry, mechanical sweep inches from Marcus's face. I heard the kid's breathing stop completely. I had the pipe wrench already raised, already cocked, and I knew with total clarity that if it locked onto him, the noise of me killing it would bring every other one in that corridor down on us at once. And there were dozens of them, and we would not survive the dozens. And so I would have to choose in that half second between the kid and the both of us, and I did not know what I would choose. It drifted on. The cold moved away. Marcus's breathing started again, ragged. We kept going. And here is the thing that nearly ended both of us, the thing no plan in the world could have accounted for, the small biological treachery of a living body. Marcus's arm. The cut. In the dark, with his heart slamming and his blood up and his pulse pushing hard, the wound on his forearm had worked itself open under the bandage, and blood was running down to his fingertips and dripping off them onto the tile floor. One slow drop at a time. A tiny sound, smaller than a dripping tap. And the dead, who navigate on sound, who have nothing in the whole ruined world to do but listen, the dead heard it. The drip. A sound the size of a pin dropping. They began to turn toward it. I felt the corridor change around us. The drift, which had been random and aimless, began to organize itself. A slow, tidal turning of attention toward the small, wet, rhythmic sound near the wall. Toward Marcus. And I understood, in the space of one held breath, that within 10 seconds, the kid was going to be the still center of every dead thing in that corridor. That the blood would not stop. That there was nothing I could press or tie or do to stop it fast enough. And that the panel was still 40 meters away, in the absolute black. So I did the cruelest kind thing I have ever done in my life. I took the box cutter out of my breast pocket, the one I hadn't known why I wanted. And I thumbed the blade out by feel. And I cut my own hand deep across the meat of the palm. A hard, fast slice that I felt as heat more than pain. and I slapped my opened hand flat against the wall on the far side of the corridor, the opposite side from Marcus, and I dragged it along the tile, smearing, making a different sound. A wetter, larger, louder sound than one boy's dripping fingers. And with my other hand, I grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and pulled him hard toward the near wall, and pressed his bleeding forearm flat against his own chest, folding it into the fabric of his shirt to muffle the drip into the cloth. And I led the dead away from him with my own blood, the way you lead a dog, by trailing a scent across the floor, drawing them across the width of the corridor toward the wall I'd marked, opening a gap on Marcus's side. It worked because they are simple. And simplicity was the only weakness they had, and the only one I needed. The loud, wet sound beat the quiet, wet sound. The drift reorganized itself toward my long smear on the far wall, bodies turning and shuffling across the tile toward it, and a gap opened up along the near wall where Marcus and I were pressed. And I shoved him into it. And we went fast now, too fast, controlled panic, my opened hand leaving its own trail behind us, that I prayed they would follow instead of us. And the last 20 meters were a blur of cold bodies brushing past in the dark. And held breath, and my heart hammering in my cut hand. And then a green glow resolved out of the black ahead, an exit sign growing. And then we were through the door at the north end of the corridor, and I slammed it shut behind us. And my fob found the reader, and the lock thunked home. And we were standing in the entrance concourse in actual light, gasping, my hand pouring blood down onto the polished floor. And Marcus, white as paper and shaking, and alive. Alive. Both of us. I made myself check his arm in the light, properly, the way I should have hours before. I unwrapped the soaked strip of shirt with my good hand and looked a cut. A real one, long and ragged, the edges of it sliced clean the way only glass slices, already doing the slow, ordinary work of clotting and healing that a bite never, ever does. A bite goes black and waxy and wrong within minutes. And his hadn't and wouldn't because it was glass, exactly as he'd told me, exactly as he'd been telling me for the last hour, while I kept the wrench loose in my hand and 6 feet of distance between us. He'd never been going to turn. I'd spent that entire impossible corridor with the wrench half raised against the wrong fear. And the plain truth of it was that the kid had needed me to trust him. And I'd only managed it at the very last meter. And I told him so, standing there bleeding on the concourse floor. And I told him I was sorry. And he looked at me, this 23-year-old with his army haircut and his glass-cut arm, and he said, "You came back for me, Dan. That's the only part of it that matters." It wasn't true I'd come for the panel, and found him on the way, but it was kind. And at 23, he was already a kinder man than I'd managed to become at 47. And I let him have it. And I've let him have it ever since. The fire command panel was a tall steel cabinet by the main entrance doors, gray, unremarkable, with its key switches and its rows of indicator lamps behind a hinged front. And through the great glass doors behind it, I could see out into the fan zone, the strobing lights of the stage, the dark and enormous mass of the crowd. 40,000 people pressed and milling and confused, but not yet running. Because they didn't know yet. Because the internal gate hadn't opened yet. Because somewhere in the building, for the last 2 hours, 2 men had been fighting over the locks, and one of them had been holding the last few doors shut with everything he had. "Reyes, I'm at the panel. We're through. Marcus is clean, it was glass. I see you on the entrance camera. Thank God." And then his voice sharpened all at once, went hard and fast, with something I hadn't heard from him in 2 hours of calm guidance. "Daniel, listen to me. Listen, the mobile credential just lit up on my screen. He knows where you are. He's making a move. He's... A clatter on the line, the sound of his chair shoving back. He's dropping the gate C interlocks. He's opening the fan zone gate. Right now, this second. He's been waiting for you to commit to that panel. And now he's spending everything he has all at once to get that gate open before you can lock it. Daniel, you have to declare the event and force default now, immediately. The sequence is... And then a voice that was not Reyes's came onto the line. Calm, pleasant, close, and clear, with none of the strain of a man hunched over a terminal in a sealed room. He'd cut into the building intercom, into the whole system, and I knew the voice the instant I heard it. And the knowing went through me colder than the cut in my hand, because it was the duty operations manager, the man who'd handed me my master fob 3 weeks earlier in a conference room with bad coffee. The man whose entire job was the safety of 80,000 people. A quiet, competent, unremarkable man named Vasily, who'd run the venue handover himself, who knew every door and every credential and every blind spot in the building because he had personally designed its security plan. "Hello, Daniel," Vasily said. "You've done remarkably well. Better than I'd have given you credit for, honestly. I've been watching you move." He was on the building intercom. He'd been listening, I understood, for some time. "Don't turn the key," he said, as reasonable and even as a man discussing the weather over a fence. "I know exactly what you're about to do, and I'm asking you, sincerely, not to. Give me 30 seconds first. Let me explain what's actually happening here, the real shape of it, because Reyes only sees doors. He's a good engineer, and he sees doors. He doesn't see the shape of the thing. I should have ignored him. I know that now, and I half knew it then." Reyes was shouting the sequence into my other ear. "Key 1 to the fire event position, then command enable, then system default. 3 keys, left to right. Turn the last one and hold it. Do it, Daniel. Do it now." And I had my bleeding hand resting on the cold chrome of the first key. But I have never in my life been able to act on a thing before I understand it. And that exact flaw, that same slow refusal that had wasted the window 2 hours earlier and cost the men in the medical bay their lives, made me stop with my hand on the key and listen to him for one more breath. "The infection doesn't stop," Vasily said, and his voice was soft and certain. "You've seen them up close. You've had your hands on them, so you know. It doesn't stop at the gates, and it doesn't stop at the city limits. Every single person who walks out of that fan zone tonight carries with them the open question of whether they were bitten somewhere in the crush and don't yet know it. 40,000 people, Daniel, dispersing into a city of millions, on the trains and the buses and in their cars, in the dark, unscreened, uncounted, untraced. That is how it doesn't stop. That is precisely how it becomes everything." A pause, letting it land. "I am not opening that gate to kill them. Listen to me. I'm opening it so they go to one place and stay in one place. The fan zone is fenced. A single perimeter, one boundary, fully enclosed. I've kept every other door in this building shut on purpose so that the infection stays contained in the bowl and the crowd stays contained in the plaza. One fence, one containment. If you lock the building down right now, the gate I've already started opening jams half open on the emergency stop. The crowd panics at the sight of it, and that single perimeter breaches in a dozen places at once. They scatter. They pour out into the city carrying it with them, and there is no putting it back. I am trying to hold the line at the fence, Daniel. And you are about to break the line for me." I stood there with my hand on the key, my own blood running down the chrome and pooling on the steel. And I'll be honest with you, because the honesty is the whole point. For 3 seconds, 3 full seconds, I believed him. Because it was coherent. Because it was built out of exactly the kind of cold, save-the-many arithmetic that I was good at. The same arithmetic I'd done on the plant level, only scaled up past anything I could hold in my hands. Containment. One fence, the millions in the dark city behind it. He'd handed it to me in the one currency I trusted, and for 3 seconds the scale tipped his way. And then Reyes, who had gone completely silent listening, said one thing into my other ear, very quietly, and it cut clean through all of it. Daniel, ask him what's on the other side of the Gate C interlock he just dropped. Ask him which way that gate opens. I asked. I said it out loud to the pleasant voice. Vasily, which way does Gate C open? Vasily didn't answer. It opens inward, Reyes said, fast and flat. Gate C opens inward, into the fan zone. He's not opening a gate to let the crowd out into his containment. He's dropping the interlock between the medical zone and the fan zone. He's opening the building's internal service gate, the big steel one, the one between the dead and plaza. He's not fencing the crowd in with each other, Daniel. He's about to open the one door that lets the dead in with them. 40,000 people fenced into a plaza with no way out. And he's opening the only door that matters, the one that pours the infected straight in among them. That's not a containment. That's a kill box. He doesn't want to stop this spreading to the city. He wants to make absolutely certain that the city's first lesson is total. He wants a number nobody will ever be able to ignore or bury. The pleasant voice came back, and the pleasantness in it had thinned out and gone brittle. And underneath it now was the thing I'd heard once before that night. In the working jaw of the steward on the concrete floor, patience without mercy, certainty without any feeling a man could reach. You don't understand the scale of what's coming, Vesely said. A small horror gets managed and minimized and buried in a report and forgotten inside a year, and then it happens again somewhere else, because nobody was made to truly learn. But a horror large enough, undeniable enough, changes everything permanently. I'm not the disease, Daniel. I'm the diagnosis. Turn that key and you're choosing a slow rolling apocalypse. Over months, over a whole country, over a clean, fast warning that might have stopped all of it. Think about the arithmetic. You're good at the arithmetic. Run it again. I have thought ever since about whether he believed himself. And I think he did. I think that's the most genuinely frightening thing about the entire night, not the dead, who are simple, who want one thing and never tire and can be beaten with a locked door and a quiet foot, but the living, competent, reasonable man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that 40,000 people in a plaza were a message worth sending, and had quietly built a plan around it and kept a forgotten credential alive for the day he could finally send it. The dead want to spread because they cannot help it. It's all that's left in them. Vasily wanted it. He'd chosen it deliberately, in advance, in a conference room, the same kind of room where he'd handed me my fob and called me by my first name and shaken my hand. I turned the first key. Daniel, don't listen to me. You're Key 1, fire event. The panel gave a flat electronic beep, and a row of amber lamps came up in sequence. Command enable, Reyes said, urgent now, riding over Vasily's voice. The second key, to its right. Through the great glass doors, I could see the crowd, and I could see, at the far edge of the fan zone, the internal gate beginning to grind open, a wide steel vehicle gate set into the perimeter. The service gate between the building and the plaza, the one Vasily had spent his last move to drop, opening inward, exactly as Reyes had said. And through the slowly widening gap, lit from behind by the strobing stage lights, I could see them coming. The dead. The road Vesely had built had filled all the way to its end. And at the end of the road was the gate. And through the gate was the crowd. And the front edge of the crowd had just begun to notice. Faces turning toward the gray shapes shuffling through the gap. A ripple of movement spreading back through the mass of them. And the first scream went up, thin and high, rising over the band that was somehow, impossibly, still playing. I turned the second key. Command Enable. More lamps, a single steady tone. System default, Reyes said, and his voice broke on the words. The third key. Turn it and hold it for 3 seconds. Everything locks. Everything. Turn it, Daniel. Vesely was saying my name over and over, no longer pleasant. The crowd was beginning to roar, the wave breaking in a garage sound. The exact sound that had started all of this 2 hours ago at my junction. Except now, it was 40,000 voices, strong, and it was the sound of a crowd discovering all at once that the only way out was through the way the dead were coming in. The gate was half open. The dead were through the gap and onto the plaza side now, the first of them lost into the front of the crowd. And the gate was a door, and a door obeys the building's mind, and the building's mind was one key turn away from changing everything it believed. I turned the third key, and I held it. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. And they were the 3 longest seconds of my life. My cut hand cramping around the chrome, the roar building through the glass, and then the building spoke. All at once, everywhere, in every direction. The sound of 500 electromagnets releasing their fire hold and slamming home to security. A single, vast, metallic exhalation that ran through the entire structure at once, like a held breath finally let go. Like the building itself had been clenched for 2 hours and had finally been allowed to close its fist. Every door, the medical corridor behind me, sealing the dead into the bowl, the whole length of the service ring locking shut, and the internal service gate at the edge of the fan zone, the one half open, the one with the dead pouring through it. Its heavy motor reversing the instant security default reasserted itself, grinding the great steel gate back the way it had come, faster shutting than it had opened, driven home on the emergency close command that security mode forces on everything. It caught 2 of them in the gap as it shut. I watched through the glass as the steel crushed them against the frame and kept right on closing. The gate not caring, the way the steel had never once cared, the way none of it had ever cared. And then it seated home with a boom I felt through the floor. And the gap was gone. And the dead were sealed on the building's side, and the living crowd was on the plaza's side. And between them was a meter of solid steel that no hand without a mind could ever turn back into a welcome. The 40,000 were still in the plaza, still in a panic, still pressed and surging, some of them trampled. A few of them the handful that had come through before the gate reversed already, a problem inside the crowd. But the perimeter pedestrian exits, the gates that led out to the street and the trains and the car parks, those were not building doors. They weren't on the system at all. They were just gates with crowd marshals standing at them, the way they always are. And they were open, the way they're always open during egress. And the crowd, finding the internal service gate slammed and sealed in front of them, and the dead shut away behind a meter of steel, did what crowds have always done. When one door closes hard in front of them, they turned, and they found the others, and they poured out through the ordinary marshaled gates into the night, frightened and bruised and trampling and screaming and alive. Away from the stadium, away from the dead, out into the dark. Vesely's containment never happened. His kill box sealed itself shut at the exact moment of his triumph. And the crowd he'd meant to feed to the dead poured out through the ordinary hand-operated gates he'd forgotten weren't his to control because they weren't part of the building, because they weren't on the system, because they were just fences with people standing at them. And the simplest, dumbest, most analog thing in the entire vast electronic stadium. A gate that a human being opens with their own two hands was the one single thing his beautiful, patient, monstrous plan had never accounted for. The intercom was silent for a long moment. Then Vesely said, very quietly, in a voice with every trace of the pleasantness gone out of it, scraped down to something flat and final. "You've made it slow now. You understand that. You've made it slow." And then he was gone, off the line, the channel dead. And I never heard his voice again. And I have spent a great deal of the time since wondering what he did in the sealed room he was in, alone, with his plan dead on the floor in front of him, and the building locked into a mode he no longer had the authority to touch. Reyes found me first. The lockdown had sealed his own booth safe, the one outside his door already dealt with by me. And once the building was forced into security default, he could finally move. And he came up through the lockdown ring with a master key and an engineer's careful calm, and found the two of us in the entrance concourse. Me sitting against the base of the fire command panel, with my cut hand wrapped tight in Marcus's spare undershirt, and Marcus beside me with his glass-cut forearm, the pair of us not talking, just breathing. Just watching the empty concourse through the great glass doors, while the last stragglers of the crowd streamed away across the dark plaza outside. He sat down on the floor with us, this man I'd known only as a voice for 2 hours. He was older than I'd pictured gray, a little stooped, with the heavy, thick-knuckled hands of a man who'd spent 40 years reaching into the insides of machines. He looked at the panel above us, at the 3 turned keys, and then at me. And he said, "It'll hold until somebody with the proper authority comes and resets it by hand. Could be hours, could be days, the way the response is going. The building's sealed now. Everything that's inside it stays inside it." He held my eyes. "You know what's still inside it." I knew. The bowl. Whatever had still been alive up in the seating bowl when I turned that key. I'd sealed them in with the dead. That was the trade, and I'd known it on the plant level, and I'd made my peace with it. And the peace had been a lie, the way that kind of peace is always a lie. Because you can decide a thing with your whole mind. Lay out the arithmetic and turn the key, and your whole mind is not the part of you that has to carry it afterward through every quiet night for the rest of your life. I asked Reyes how many had been in the bowl when I turned it. He didn't know. He told me, gently, that nobody would know for a long while. The crowd up in the bowl had been draining out the entire time the fire mode held. He said that was the one mercy buried inside the catastrophe. That the same wide-open fire mode doors that had doomed the building had also, for 2 full hours, let the bowl empty itself down toward the exits. Most got out. He believed most got out. The ones who didn't were the ones who always don't. In any disaster, the slow, the fallen, the ones with no one to carry them, the ones who'd panicked and gone the wrong way and ended up deeper in instead of further out. I sealed them in. I'd put 40,000 on one side of the scale and an unknown smaller number on the other, and I'd chosen the 40,000, and I would choose it again. And the choosing it again does not help. It has never once helped. It is no comfort at all in the part of a man that has to go on living in the same body as the choice he made. Here's the question I have never been able to answer, and I'll put it to you, because you've stayed with me all the way to the end of it, and you've earned the right to weigh the thing I can't. Was Vesely wrong? Not morally, he was a monster. And that part is simple, and I won't pretend otherwise. I mean, was he wrong about the slow apocalypse? The crowd I saved poured out into the night, unscreened and uncounted and untraced, in the dark, on the trains and the buses, and into a city of millions, exactly the way he said they would. And some of them, I don't know how many. And nobody ever will. Some of them carried the open question out with them into the world. I chose the 40,000 standing in front of me. I don't know what the 40,000 chose, downstream, for everyone who came after them. I chose the ones I could reach. Tell me where you land on it, honestly, because I've turned it over for years, and I still cannot find the bottom of it. They got the three of us out through the loading dock at dawn, a tactical team in dark suits I didn't recognize, not police, who took my statement and Reyes's and Marcus's each separately in 3 different rooms, and who then asked us, all 3, in identical, careful language, not to discuss the operational details of the building's security systems with anyone, ever, for reasons of public safety. They never found Vasily. Or they found him and never told us. I've never been able to decide which is worse to imagine. The official account that came out over the following weeks called it a mass casualty incident with an unconfirmed biological component, contained on site. And the number they printed for the dead was lower than I know it was. And the word deliberate appeared nowhere in any of it. And the name Vasily appeared nowhere. And the men in the dark suits had been very clear in their careful identical language about exactly why none of it ever would. Marcus's arm healed. Just a scar now, a long, pale, ragged line on his forearm from the wired glass. He sends me a message every year on the date. He always says the same thing. You came back for me, and I've long since stopped correcting him, because I finally understand that he isn't really thanking me for coming back at all. He's reminding me that on the worst night of both our lives, in the absolute dark of that medical corridor, when I had the pipe wrench half raised against him and the wrong fears screaming in my blood, I didn't swing. That's the part he holds on to. That's the part he needs to be true. So I let him have it, every year, the way I let him have it that night on the concourse floor. Reyes retired not long after. He sends me nothing. And I don't blame him. But he answered the phone the one time I called him. A year on. And we didn't say much, 2 men who'd spent 2 hours fighting for a building's soul, and had won and lost in the same turn of the same key. Before he hung up, he said one thing that I think about more than anything else from that whole night. He said, "The building was never the problem, Daniel. Understand that, if you understand nothing else. The building did exactly what it was built to do all night long. Fire mode saves people from fire. Security mode saves people from threats. Every door obeyed its logic perfectly, start to finish. It worked exactly as designed. The only problem in the entire system was that a man got to decide which kind of night it was." And then he hung up. And I sat there with the phone in my hand, the same way I'd sat with a wall phone down on the plant level, listening to the dial tone, the most ordinary sound in the world, and thinking about how thin the wall really is between fire and security, between the dead and the living, between a quiet, competent man who hands you your fob and calls you by your first name, and a man who has already decided, long in advance, in a room with bad coffee, exactly how he is going to open the doors when the worst night finally comes. I don't work security anymore. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand at a junction again, watching a screen, telling myself that the strange thing I just saw is probably nothing, that I'm only tired at the end of a long shift. Because the one truth I carried out of that stadium and have never been able to put down isn't about the dead. The dead are simple. They want one single thing, and they never stop wanting it, and they never get tired. And you beat them with a locked door and a quiet foot and the patience to stand perfectly still in the dark until they drift away. The truth I carry is about the man who built the road. He didn't hate those 40,000 people. He'd have told you, calmly, reasonably, that he was trying to save the millions standing behind them. He had run the arithmetic, the same cold, save the many arithmetic I am so good at. And he'd carried his answer to it for who knows how long, quietly, waiting for his one night. And when the night finally came, he was calm and competent and reasonable, right up until the steel gate closed on his plan, with 2 of the dead crushed in the gap. And the thing that still stops me sleeping, the thing I cannot get out from under, isn't how different that man was from me. It's how he wasn't. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, then stay with the channel. There are more of them. And I'll keep telling them as honestly as I know how to tell them. Take care of the people standing next to you in the dark. And the next time a building decides what kind of night it's going to be, ask yourself who got to make that choice, because somebody always does.